My name is Sam Levine, and I am one of the assistant principals at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. And I am the 12th grade administrator this year. And so I am with the class of 2021, and I'm happy to be here this evening to present some information before we turn it over to our experts. So I will go ahead and get us started. I do want to just let the group know that we are recording this session, so we can share it with any participants who are unable to join us this evening. And so this session is being recorded to be shared. So if you would like to turn your screen off, you are welcome to do so at this time. That may not even be part of the recording, but just in case, you are welcome to turn your screen off if you'd like, just knowing that it's being recorded. Okay, I'm going to screen share just a few quick slides for you before we continue on. Okay. So I am going to get us started this evening, and the first item that we'll talk about this evening is the Accuplacer test. And one of my roles at school is I am actually the Accuplacer testing coordinator for BCC High School. And I do have my name and my email address up here. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the Accuplacer, but about any follow-up questions from tonight, or any questions at all that may be on your radar. And again, I'm Sam Levine, 12th grade administrator, and my email address is there on the screen for you. And it's also available on the BCC website. The Accuplacer is a college board placement test. It's not an entrance exam like the ACT or SAT. It's actually, once students have been admitted to college, the Accuplacer is used to determine appropriate placement for students in mathematics and English courses. Many colleges administer the Accuplacer to determine appropriate mathematics and English placement in cases where the admitted student does not have qualifying scores on the ACT or SAT. Montgomery College, for example, uses the Accuplacer in this way. MCPS, this is an important detail. MCPS offers free and unlimited opportunities for students to take the Accuplacer, providing students with multiple opportunities, continual opportunities, to earn qualifying scores on this assessment before they begin college. Each MCPS high school has a high school Accuplacer program coordinator. And again, at BCC, that is one of my roles. The coordinator's role is to collaborate with other stakeholders to increase awareness of the College Board Accuplacer test and to prepare students for participation, with the ultimate goal of enabling more students to test college ready so they are able to enroll in college credit-bearing courses immediately upon starting college. And the value in that is that students are able to earn credits toward college graduation quickly, and it also saves money because they're able to immediately begin those credit-bearing courses and not any other remedial courses leading up to the credit-bearing courses. Khan Academy is a recommended preparation resource. And we do use that at school as we prepare students for the Accuplacer. And so that is a tremendous resource that can be checked out as well in preparation. And I did link the Accuplacer website, and it's very informative. And so you can go to Accuplacer's website if you would like to explore additional information. I was in touch just today with the MCPS county coordinator for Accuplacer, just to check in and make sure there hasn't been any additional developments to planning for the year, just in our current environment. And he confirmed that that information is still being looked at as we speak, but that there have not yet been any updates to timelines for testing or expectations or any policy changes or anything like that. So right now, schools are not beginning this process. We are waiting for additional guidance as well as training. There will be a training for schools and program coordinators, and then from there, the schools will roll out their program. So the timeline is being discussed. It's to be determined, but we as a school will communicate any updates that we become aware. As soon as we become aware of them, we'll communicate to the school community and to students to make sure that everyone's aware. Again, please feel free to reach out to me. With any Accuplacer related questions. I'm happy to be a resource to you for any questions that you may have, and I can help direct you if I'm unable to support you directly. But I did just want to provide a little bit of information about the Accuplacer program and the structure that the school implements for facilitating the tests. So thank you very much, and I will turn it over to our guest this evening to take us the rest of the way. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sam. All right, Ned, I'm going to try to get our slides up. While I do, maybe you can introduce yourself, and then I'll.
Sure. Sure. My name is Ned Johnson. I'm a president, and I describe myself as tutor geek at Prep Matters. We do one-on-one test preparation. Phil is the founder and president of Capital Educators. We've been doing test prep for about the same period of time. He provides, and his group provides, a terrific instruction class-based format for SAT and ACT prep, and I and my group do the same thing, doing this one-on-one. I did want to echo really quickly a point that Sam made about the Accuplacer. For if you have kids who you think may start their education at Montgomery College or other schools like that, it's incredibly valuable that they take seriously as best they can the Accuplacer or the SAT and a minimum score of 500 for reading, writing, or 500 for math, or an ACT score of 21 allows them to place into credit-bearing classes. And it's really important if they can do that, because it's getting them started on their path. It's saving you money. It's saving them frustration, so that they feel like they're really in classes that are moving them forward in their education, when possible, earning credits and taking the steps they need to towards going from Montgomery College to finish up to 2 years if they're trying to get a 4-year degree. Everything's a little bit goofed up this year, but it's easy for people to kind of shrug their shoulders a little bit sometimes, particularly with tests. Phil and I will talk quite a bit about colleges being test optional. The traditional 4-year colleges being test optional this year. But that Accuplacer or the SAT or ACT used in place of that to allow kids who may be headed towards Montgomery College to start with credit-bearing classes. It's really valuable to them and that they take those tests as seriously as they can.
All right, so let me jump in and try to frame things with a question I've been asked quite a bit since, I don't know, say March of 2020, which is, does standardized testing even matter anymore? And the people who approach me with this, Ned, tend to do so with a little bit of glee and excitement in their eyes.
Schadenfreude.
Yep. Now, I don't think this will surprise you, but my answer to whether testing still matters is, yeah. I mean, there's probably more important stuff on most of your plates, but testing still plays a role in college admissions and by extension in high school life. And if we take a look at where we are now, for those of you who are the parents of seniors or for the seniors themselves, kids in the class of 2021 who are already underway in their college search, these students are applying in a pretty much a purely test optional landscape. Meaning you can apply to virtually any institution you'd like nowadays without an SAT score or an ACT score. Now, many of us in either admissions or testing project that this will not be a permanent phenomenon, and that a number of institutions that have recently gone test optional will flip back to requiring these tests. Maybe not right away, but maybe in 1 to 2 to 3+ years. But I'd say this, even if that supposition is wrong, and even if colleges by and large remain test optional for the foreseeable future, we would still argue that testing should and will continue to play a role. And mostly to cut it as simply as I can, because even test optional is not equivalent to test blind. There are a handful of institutions out there that are truly blind when it comes to testing. Not only do they not require those scores, they don't want to see them, and they're not going to use them in the admissions process. But the overwhelming majority, 99+% of schools out there, are test optional. And I'll butcher something a college admissions officer shared with me recently, that I think kind of summarizes it. She said, you know, you can apply to our school without an SAT score, without an ACT score, and it's not going to put you at a disadvantage. But if you apply to our school with a competitive number on either of those tests, it's certainly not going to hurt you. And so that parsed language is kind of where we are right now. And I guess what I would say is the bottom line on sort of framing the test optional world is, we wouldn't want your starting point at the beginning of 10th grade or the beginning of 11th grade to be to just flat out dismiss these tests as irrelevant, as exams your kids will never sit for. We actually think, by and large, for most families and most students, and we'll get into some of the nuances, I have a feeling, considering these tests, planning for them, prepping for them, and collecting the scores will be an advantage. I want to just hit one or two more areas here, Ned, before I hand it over to you. The reality is, if you apply to a school with a score, you're doing that admissions office a great favor, okay? It makes their decision process a heck of a lot easier. But you should also know that there's a lot of momentum behind the test optional movement. As a matter of fact, more and more schools were going test optional well before the arrival of the coronavirus. And that's because, frankly, it really helps colleges. The very first thing that happens when a school goes test optional is that institution receives more applications, period. And that's because more kids feel more emboldened, more comfortable about their prospects, and they're going to target reach schools that might have otherwise been off their radar. Another thing that happens at these institutions that people don't discuss as often is that the school's average incoming test scores magically improve, and often quite a bit. And that's because the students who bother to send scores in a test optional environment are the ones who are pretty happy with how they did and want to share their SAT or ACT result. So if you look at it from a college's standpoint, they get more applications and their average scores improve. And so there's a lot of wind at the back of the test optional movement. And by the way, that completely ignores, okay, maybe the most important reason that colleges have been pushing to go test optional, which is it greatly increases access for students across the entire country, particularly those from underserved and less affluent areas who just don't have access to the kind of resources that so many of our kids do. I don't want you to think that this only benefits the schools. As my last piece here, I'd say it also really benefits students. As I kind of intimated, more students are going to feel more comfortable expanding their college lists, even if their SAT or ACT scores are a little bit low in the new world. But maybe more importantly, a test optional landscape puts greater control over the application process in students' hands and your hands as parents. Because not only do you decide whether to take the test to begin with, but if you do take it, which is what I would gently recommend, okay, you still have the option of deciding whether to send your scores to all of your target colleges, to some of them, or to none. And so it increases choice and control. Ned, I feel like I've talked a while. Maybe you could pick up here with the role of testing and maybe merit scholarships and any other pieces that I missed.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think that's all great advice, Phil, because so many of the kids I work with, well, I should say this, for some kids, these tests are great opportunity. And for some kids, these tests are like, oh my gosh, I was so set for college, except for this stupid test, because, you know, there are people on the call who have kids who are just they're great test takers. And there are other people on this meeting tonight who have kids who are great in school on kind of everything but the test. And that's to echo Phil's point about what test optional allows kids to do is to really figure out, do I want to include an SAT or an ACT as part of my profile, or do I really think that's going to cut against me, in which case I don't. So I had a young woman I was working with, started in the spring, and frankly, you know, simply put, she wasn't a strong tester, and this was not going to show her best work. And when the University of Maryland went to test optional, they said, you know what? Thank you very much. It's been great working with you. We're going to stop tutoring. We're not going to take the test because no matter how hard she works, our expectation is she's not going to get to a score that's going to be high enough that's going to really help her. So I think that the conversation that you want to have with you know, your families and with your kids to think through is this a thing? Are these test things that are likely have a reasonable chance of helping me? In which case, let's try to take it seriously. But if you have everything says, boy, we're going to shine so much better without this test, then you can let it go. And as Phil said, as Phil pointed out, we have the opportunity to kind of take the test and then see how it goes. And lastly, because I kind of take really seriously the effects of stress on performance, because of this test score optional world that we're currently in, it allows kids who are really strong academically and who can do well on tests, except for the kind of jitters that sometimes undo them. This is like home run derby, where if they're swinging for the fences and if you get a great score, send it off. And if it's a score that's not any good at all, it's like you were never there at all. So we have a little bit more grace in this process. Phil asked about merit scholarship, and I should say there's a really, really good book that just came out yesterday by a guy named Jeff Salingo. He used to be the editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education, and the book's called Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside higher education, higher admissions, college, whatever it is, a year inside college admissions. I forget the subtitle exactly, but he was an embedded reporter for 3 universities, including Emory University in Atlanta. And he really looks at kind of what goes on. And, but he talks about merit scholarship. And I should point this out, that merit scholarship is really not merit. It's basically a coupon. It's basically a discount is really what it is. And so how this works for people in places like DC, probably there are a lot of folks on the call, at least some folks on the call who could, you know, pay the full freight at a college or university. But goodness, if you could get a discount, that would be kind of a good thing. And generally what colleges have done is use SAT scores or ACT scores to say, this kid's got a 34, we think he might go someplace else. If we cut the cost by $20,000, maybe he'll come here. And so the vast majority of colleges, even when they've gone test optional, have continued to use SAT or ACT scores as part of, for merit money, for merit scholarships. So just something, you know, not to make it super complicated, but it's a reason why, knowing that you can use the scores or not. But if you have a kid who's a pretty solid tester, putting a little effort, you know, into preparing for that could in many ways become the most profitable part-time job a kid could ever have. You know, if a couple dozen hours of his work with Khan Academy or Phil or me or whatever allows him to get a score that you just cut the cost of tuition over 4 years is kind of worth doing.
Completely agree. So like, one way of looking at it is, at a time when fewer students are testing, and by extension, fewer strong scores are in circulation, having a good score may truly redound to your benefit even more nowadays than it might have a few years ago. But boy, it's nice to know that you don't need them necessarily. And so it is a game changer. I want to make one procedural comment before I go deeper. We recognize that you are out there and we are talking at you. If you have questions at any point in this presentation, which we hope is the case, we'd love for you to chat them in directly in real time to Neha Gupta. I have a feeling she's going to announce herself over chat here. Chat to Neha Gupta directly. She will filter the questions to Ned and me, and we'll try to answer them in real time. We think you should ask them when you're thinking about them, though, before they go away.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to start here, and then please. We tried to set up this slide in a way that conveyed a lot, and I think we may have fallen short, but here's the idea. If you look on the far left, you'll find a handful of schools that are currently test blind, okay? Those few exceptions to the rule that will not use scores even if they're submitted. This list has grown and should continue to grow, but it's obviously a pretty limited list. The mass of schools out there are in this rectangular band of test optional. And the reason I have it written from left to right so broadly is to kind of convey the spectrum element to it. On one extreme, basically adjacent to those schools that are test blind, are the ones that have made the decision to permanently go test optional. Some of them were on the verge of making this call before the virus hit. Others were in discussions and then used this moment in time to flip their policy. The overwhelming majority of schools, though, are going to be somewhere in the middle here, in sort of an experimental phase. Doing it for this year, maybe talking about doing it for 2 to 3 possible years. And you should also be aware that there's a good number of schools that adopted this policy pretty reluctantly. They may not have gone public with that reluctance, but as you might imagine, particularly for larger institutions, the state schools that many of us are interested in, losing a data point like an SAT score or an ACT score greatly complicates the admissions decision. And so they've gone along for now, but you can bet that if given an opportunity, these schools will flip their policies back. And in the interim, may not say it explicitly, but certainly wouldn't mind getting scores. Sorry, Ned, I cut you off.
No, that's all exactly right. And to echo that point, if you're a flagship state school, if you're University of Michigan or Maryland or Virginia, where you get tens of thousands of applications, wading through only transcripts is a little daunting if you got tens of thousands of them. And how do you really equate, a 3.9 at BCC to, some school in North Dakota, right? And that's kind of the idea behind, standardized test scores from the get-go, that because we don't have a national curriculum, because kids here aren't necessarily learning the exact same thing as, kids that stayed over or have, the other side of the country, that the scores, made lives a little bit easier for college admissions people. And they understand as fully as anyone on this call how deeply flawed these tests are, but still they make their lives easier. And if nothing else, they're sort of corroborating scores. Corroborating information. I should echo the point about that. If you have a kid who's interested in one of the service academies, Naval Academy, West Point, blah, 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 they are still requiring them. And this is kind of important. If you have a kid currently, so far as I understand, the service academies, if you have a kid who takes the SAT or ACT with accommodations with extra time, they will not accept scores with extra time accommodations. I had a colleague who long ago called them up and they said, well, we don't fight untimed wars, which is blunt, but a little ungenerous, but that's where it is. But to echo Phil's point, at this point, the vast majority of schools are test optional. So we have that backstop, we can breathe about it. But really, I guess the way that I would think about tests right now is really nobody, with a few exceptions, no kid anywhere in the country has to take a test. It's simply that they may want to, because if they can do well, it can help them. And that's kind of a nice place to be, where you can do it if you want to, but you don't have to.
One question that I saw popped up here was about the PSAT and what's going on with that. So I'll share what I know, and if I fall short, Ned will correct me. The PSAT normally would be administered on Wednesday, October 14th in the county on a school day in school. And the registration for that test is typically handled within the school itself. Right now, there are all kinds of questions. To help make the PSAT a touch more accessible, College Board has 3 dates in October, the 14th, as I mentioned, a Saturday date, the 17th, and a backup date, October 28th. On top of that, recognizing that some areas of the country are slower than others to even think about reopening, the College Board is going to offer a PSAT in late January. More important than the dates about PSAT is really understanding the significance or lack of significance of the PSAT. The PSAT is a preliminary SAT. It is a practice test, okay? Even if you have the best day of your life and score in the top, okay, 0.5%, colleges are still not going to see your exact results on a PSAT. And so this actually connects to an offering Ned and I wanted to make sure you were aware of, which is this. Every year, Prep Matters Group and Capital Educators administer exams at BCC that are just like the real thing, but completely pretend. These results are for you, period, to use as a starting point. This fall, we will be offering these tests virtually, proctored online, but same realistic tests, scored with the same software, generating the same score reports. And I think maybe more than any other year, if you are a 10th grader or 11th grader, you should seriously think about taking our exams, because there is no guarantee as to whether that PSAT is going to happen in a month or in 3 months. And I guess my main point is, if it doesn't, this is not a Greek tragedy. You can still find out where your starting point is on these tests. I think sometimes parents emphasize the importance of the PSAT, because when we were kids, there was a lot more chatter out there about national merit and the significance of it. I'll let you take over from there.
Yeah, no, that's basically it. I mean, the national merit, if you're scoring the top 0.5% nationwide, then you become a national merit semifinalist. And then depending if your grades are good enough and you have to take an SAT later on to confirm that the scores were valid, you become a national merit finalist. And that's a really nice feather in your cap for college admissions, but it doesn't carry nearly the same weight that it did back when, 50 years ago when Phil and I were in high school. So again, it's an opportunity. It's something your kids may want to do on, but it's not something they have to. And of course, if you get that designation or you're a commended scholar, you do really well on this. It's a nice feather in your cap, but otherwise, no college knows how you did on the test. It's not scores that are shared. Someone asked about, well, I guess I can jump in on these. There's another question about PSAT 10, PSAT 11. So the SAT is in theory a test that kids take in junior year. Sometime in the spring, typically. The PSAT was supposed to come before that in October of junior year. There's also a PSAT 10 that kids sometimes will take in the fall. Sometimes it's also given in the spring for some school systems. I think MCPS typically does the PSAT 10th grade in the fall. Other school systems do it in the spring. There's even a PSAT 9. College Board has worked up a PSAT 7, 8. You can kind of see where this goes. They're just trying to get people into the funnel. The PSAT 10, if you have a sophomore, doesn't count for anything. Your kid could get every single question right, and that would get him a pat on the back from mom and dad and maybe some ribbing by his friends, but the scores don't go anywhere. To be eligible for the National Merit Scholarship, you have to do really well on the test, and you have to be a U.S. citizen and a junior. So the sophomore PSAT is really just a practice for the PSAT, which is practice for the actual SAT.
A semi-related question had to do with taking the actual SAT and ACT and reporting versus shielding those scores. And by the way, we are going to talk a little bit about the differences between those tests as this talk rolls on. Couple of quick points. The first one is this. If a college is test optional nowadays, testing really is optional, which means if you sit for an official SAT or ACT, you will have the right to send or shield that score, period. The only thing you have to be careful about relates to the registration process for these exams. When you sign up to sit for an SAT or ACT, at the very end of that process online, a window will pop up that will ask, hey, would you like to send your scores for free to 4 colleges? And parents may just kind of enjoy the sound of that word, free, but it's really, generally speaking, not to your benefit to avail yourself of that, because what we really want to do here is take the pressure off our kids, collect their scores, and then decide after some contemplation whether those scores are worth sending. You should know, going back to the days before COVID, which I think relates to your question, there were a few schools out there that would say, we want to know every time you've taken the test, okay? In today's landscape, that's not a situation to be afraid of. But I will add one caveat, and Ned, feel free to build off this. Even though you can almost certainly hide every test you take, I still don't recommend that you drop 50 to 60 bucks and put yourself into the official test setting before you're ready and before you're realistically going to earn a score you're at least remotely happy with. These tests are long and grueling and stressful, and there are so many ways to simulate that process for free that remove a little bit of that anxiety, including taking the kinds of tests we give at school.
You know, just to add to that, to the question about how scores are used. Again, if a school is test optional, you can send what you want, you can hold back what you want, you can send everything, you can hold it back. College Board for the SAT has a policy of what's called score choice, which allows the kid to send the reading and writing score from this test, the math from that test. So if you have an opportunity, if your kid has an opportunity to take the test a couple of times, she could send, kind of make a Frankenstein score, the best from here and the best from there. Most colleges will will super score, meaning you could take the ACT 3 times and they'll take the English from here, the math from there, if the reading from there. So a lot of the rigidity that existed really pre-COVID about scores and really having to be super careful on this kind of thing has kind of flown out the window. Honestly, at this point, the biggest challenge with kids having multiple sets of scores to try to mix and match is really just finding the opportunities to take the test multiple times. So if you come away with nothing from our talk tonight, it would simply be, take the test when you feel like you have a chance of doing well, knowing that if any part of it goes well, that can help you. And if any part of it doesn't go well, you don't have to share that information with colleges.
One quick question. Can you guys just reiterate what the dates are for the practice tests?
Sure. For our ACT, it's Saturday, November 7th, and for capital educators in the SAT, Saturday, December 12th. And they'll be sending out information. Kristen O'Brien and team will send these dates out and remind people about this and help with the sign up. And then the following week after the November 7th, I think we're on the 11th, and then a few days later, the 17th of December, my group and then Phil's group will share the scores. We'll send them to you. We'll have another conversation like this and really get into the weeds about what do these scores mean? How do you use them? Big picture, these practice tests, there are two purposes to them as we'll kind of pivot into talking about SAT versus ACT. The first purpose is to simply give your kids practice taking the test. Just as Phil described, it costs you nothing, right? You don't have to spend 60 bucks. It's very flexible. You're doing this at home, and allows kids to get the experience taking the test in kind of a simulated situation and to get feedback. Well, this was great. That looks terrific. Ooh, that was kind of, I could have done that differently. And that will help them do better on the actual test when they finally get around to it. The second purpose, and that's kind of why we're talking here tonight, is to help your kids figure out, gosh, am I more of an SAT kid or am I more of an ACT kid? And invariably, people kind of just jump to a conclusion that I'm better at one test than the other. And that's fine. But for Phil and for me, we just want that to be an informed decision. You think the ACTs can be the worst thing ever? Let's just take 3 hours and make sure. Yep, that's terrible. Throw it out the window, burn the boats, we're done, right? Or I always thought that I was going to be an SAT kid, but you took the ACT, and surprisingly, that was a lot better than I thought it would be. One thing that I'll say, and I know that Phil echoed this, and we'll all talk about this when the scores come back. A lot of times people agonize. Should I do the SAT? Should the ACT? Should the SAT? Should the ACT? I know people call up my group and say, we need to figure out which test we do before we start preparing. And Phil has the exact same thing. Which class should I take? And the fundamental thing that Phil and I would try to make clear to you is that generally 70% of kids do almost exactly the same whichever test they take, because they're either really good at one test and that helps them be really good at the other test, or they're kind of not good at one test, which means they're going to struggle a bit on the other. There are people kind of at one end or the other for some specific reason, we'll talk about this in a moment, where they just really clobber the SAT relative to the ACT, or vice versa. And those are the kids who we're really interested in discovering, and having your kids take, Phil's test and my test, so that they can discover that. So if they really think they should lean left and it turns out they should lean right, we get that information now. So whatever preparation they're going to do, whatever test they're going to take, it's informed, and they're going down the path where they already have kind of an advantage. So Phil brought up how students choose. The first thing people always start with is the scores, right? You can take would you want to jump in on this, Phil? Do you want me to roll with it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll pick up in the middle. Go. You start.
Okay. So, a lot of companies for a while were doing this combination SAT, ACT test. I'm going to jump in the middle there. And I would not recommend that. Because there's a fatigue issue. I think it's much better to simply take, and it's more time, I know, but invest the 3 hours and take a full darn SAT. So you're really clear on what you liked and what you didn't like from that 3-hour experience. And then do an ACT so you can really make a comparison, right? This is not testing, Burger King and McDonald's, side by side burgers to figure out which one is better. We really want to have the full experience of an SAT, the full experience of an ACT, and then make decisions that way. Oftentimes people will say, it's the score. And I will say that in addition to the score is a kid's subjective experience of the test. Because the score might be a little wobbly, but they say, I know, but I just, I spent a little too much time here. And if I hadn't done that, it would have been just fine. So, because ultimately, your sons and daughters are going to have to spend time or not, taking these tests. And we really want to lean in the direction that they feel more comfortable. I'll say, I have these conversations a lot with students, and I always ask them, they'll say, I like this test better. So why do you like it better? And as long as their stated beliefs are credible, unless they're crazy, in which case that's a terrible decision, pal. I almost always go with that, because ultimately they have to put the work in. And that sense of belief of I can do well on this and here's why is really, really important. And that intuition they have is just as important as the scores themselves.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm strongly in agreement. I think one reason why taking full tests and comparing the experiences is so critical is that what makes these tests different isn't really the content. Like if you had to throw a number at it, you'd say that the SAT and ACT are almost 80% identical and maybe 20% different. And so the way to form that conclusion based on scores or feeling is to sit through the entire thing, get a sense for the ups and downs of it, the pacing of it, and just how grueling the exams are. I want to make one point that may sound contradictory, but really isn't if you unpack it, okay? We both agree that it is a wise idea to try to figure out which test is a better fit for your student. It's the reason why Ned and I actually lead this talk every fall, okay? Well before COVID. But I do want to make a point, which is as enviable as it is to try to figure out which test is the better fit. If you get this wrong, if you go through your process and you think you are an SAT person and you engage in that preparation seriously and discover that your scores never quite bounce the way you would have expected, there is nothing wrong with taking the ACT as a backup, because quality prep for one test inadvertently prepares you really darn well for the other. And so beyond just the test optional piece, the fact that kids have two relatively similar exams from which to choose really empowers them even further. And I'd make one other point that relates to the times. Given the widespread uncertainty about testing and about pretty much everything nowadays, it's probably even more important to be open to the possibility of taking both tests. Because who knows, maybe the SAT is slower to run its exams than the ACT. Or maybe one of the testing agencies, most people think it'll be ACT, comes up with an online version of the test before the other. So we still encourage you to take our exams, to do your research, to try to pick your poison, but do not put too much pressure on yourselves to figure this out at the front edge of your prep. Like, most important thing is to just start working at this, and you can have your thoughts evolve over time. While we're here, and then we can get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty on the tests, I just want to broadly talk about the different ways you can prepare for these things. Probably these three categories have all crossed your mind if you've given this any thought. Many people very successfully study on their own. It's not a great mystery what's on these exams. The internet is populated with practice tests and real questions. There are books like the ones on your screen that you can pick up for $20 to $25 online awfully quickly. Self-study just requires two things. Like, you actually have to study by yourself, and you also have to do it thoughtfully. And Ned, I'm sure you've had even more experiences with this than I, but I'll find kids who really are diligent, who will like lock themselves up in their room, take a 3+ hour exam on their own, earnestly take the thing, score it, and then either celebrate the result, okay, or walk away frustrated at how they did. And then never take 10 minutes to look over the questions that they missed or to formulate any conclusions about where their weaker areas might be. So if you're going to study on your own, you have to carve out the time, but you also have to address the issue thoughtfully. You have to try to figure out where your weaker spots are. Ned's group, they specialize in private tutoring. The benefits are obvious. You can structure it. You can do it when you want. It's about as much personal attention as you can possibly get. And many students really need and flourish the best in that environment. My approach is small groups of 8 to 10 kids where students are grouped by their scores and strengths. One of the benefits to our approach is that it's so structured. There are so many hours built in that they can't run from. And there's almost no homework associated with this approach because we lock them up either physically or virtually and make them sit for X number of hours. You all should know your kids well enough to have a sense for which of these categories is most likely to be a good fit. And then most importantly, you guys should have a conversation as a family and dig into that.
Right. And if I can add to that, really, I feel that's really well said. I think if I can add to that, I think one kind of helpful way to think about what does test preparation do if it's done well. And for me, there are kind of three buckets that we might want to attend to. And they're basically knowledge, skills, and then emotion/motivation, right? If you have a kid who's, she's a great learner, she doesn't get jittery, if you give her the knowledge, she's going to apply it and run with it. That's really just a knowledge piece, right? So then that's as Sam pointed out, that's work on the Khan Academy, that's getting a book, that's using, many resources that are available at a very low cost or even free on the internet, because it's just a matter of getting up to speed with all the stuff that's on these tests. In addition to content, though, they're also kind of skills, right? And this is why people don't tend to learn yoga or golf from a book or video, right? They get an instructor say, well, actually, Ned, you've got to change this or whatever, right? And so much of what people kind of talk about as SAT tricks is the work that Phil does or that I do, helping kids learn how to use tools in kind of more creative ways. Because then, of course, in a math class, how you do a problem is way more important than kind of getting the answer, because your fine teachers are trying to impart to kids the tools of mathematics, the tools of mathematicians, so they can carry those things forward. But of course, the SAT and ACT doesn't matter at all where they're using the kind of tools of real mathematics, because this is not a real math test. You can plug in numbers, you can do all kinds of wackadoodle things that students, particularly ones who are very earnestly academic, might not have realized they can do. So that's kind of the skills part to it. And then the third part is just the emotion, right? A lot of kids are very strong learners, but they just kind of get undone by stress. And sometimes that's going to go a lot better when they've got the camaraderie of taking a class with Phil, and it's all a lot of energy, and that kind of carries them through, or they do one-on-one because there's some kind of, you know, things they need to help reframe and just think about the test and make themselves a little bit differently. Or for kids who really just need a lot of motivation, they want to do it, but they just never feel like doing the work. You got them the book and they've sat there gathering dust, in which case taking a class with 6 or 8 kids and it's, you know, it's fun and the instructors are cool over Capital Educators, gives them the energy to do the work, or doing it one-on-one where they're kind of a particular personality that really is going to get the most out of their time. So just think about that. Is it a knowledge piece? Is it also a skills piece? Or is there a kind of a motivational or anxiety piece that also needs to be attended to? So let me run through this pretty quickly. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, actually had a question come in.
Please.
With full transparency, what would you suggest about shelling out and spending lots of valuable time, money, and mental health if your student is not interested in going to a really competitive school?
It's a really good question. And the easiest way, and I'll frame this by saying, people have asked Phil and me, you know, maybe 1,000 times since we've been doing this, what's a good SAT score? What's a good ACT score? And the way that you think about this, and let's come back to the question you just shared with us, is you go on the internet, you type in Tulane, average SAT score. You type in Goucher, average SAT score, Hampshire, whatever. You type in the scores and say, they'll show you the 25th to 75th percentile. So these are the majority of kids who ended up matriculating to that school. You want to be within that range. You really don't want to be at the 25th percentile unless you're really kind of overachieving in some way. You kind of want to be towards the middle of that range, maybe towards the top if your grade's a little bit lower. And those are the scores you need. Now, the reality is there are only 41 colleges in the country that accept fewer than 20% of applicants. So particularly in places like DC, we all get pretty wound up that the college is impossible to get into. Well, the vast majority of colleges, as long as you're relatively academic, you don't have to be super competitive, and you don't need great scores, or you may not need scores at all, as we started this conversation out with. So what I would do if I have a kid who's like, you know, just it's all good, whatever it is, it's kind of all good, is make a list of 10 or 20 schools that you're looking at and spend some time looking at the internet. Do we need scores? Did you already take a PSAT and you're above their average? Well, don't give money to Phil. No offense, Phil. Don't give it to me. Spend that time and money someplace else. But just make sure it's an informed decision. And if you're not really sure, well, then reach out to the wonderful college counseling department that BCC has and just ask, you know, and just see where it is. But heaven, I would say, if you're a parent and you're a little bit anxious about this, but your kid says, I don't want to do it, don't spend your energy trying to convince them. You know, try to get some, you know, I would push that off to the college counseling, but goodness no, I would not spend time and effort, particularly in a year when school's going to be hard enough. If they were a hill to die on, for me, it would not be getting your kid to take the SAT or ACT. Just make sure it's an informed decision.
Completely agree. One general related point. We've been running programs at CapEd for almost 25 years. I'd say 90+% of our calls from parents in these circumstances, or more standard ones, start with, well, my child is this kind of student, but not a great test taker. To the point where, like, I don't even know where the great test takers are because I never hear from them. Literally, this is how almost every call starts with us. So if you've got a kid who is more motivated, or if you as a family are more motivated about testing and prep, a couple things to keep in mind. The practice exams that Ned's group gives, that mine give, the actual PSAT, if and when you're able to sit for it, will generate very accurate scores that are snapshots. They're going to tell you what you would score on the real test on that given day. So on the one hand, yeah, they are a perfect reflection of what the actual exams are. However, with almost no exceptions, sophomores and juniors' actual scores, their official scores, will inevitably be better than their practice ones, particularly if those practice tests were taken without any real understanding of the test. By virtue of schooling, reading, maturation, and maybe preparation with groups like ours, you can bet the numbers are going to change dramatically. So if you took Ned's last point to mean, I'm going to hop online now and check the 25th to 75th percentiles for all of these schools and then make myself nervous that my sophomore isn't in that range, you shouldn't be there mentally. The scores will naturally improve many times considerably. One thing I noticed, reminding me that we are at virtual BCC, we did get at least one question, Ned, about, well, what are these small differences between the SAT and the ACT? So
that's why we're here, right? So let me talk in really broad strokes. So really quickly, I assume that people on the call are kind of more versed in the SAT than the ACT. And so just to remind people, the SAT has two sections, we're really not going to go in the weeds on this as we have in years past, because I think it's kind of misses the point a little bit. There's a reading, writing section. There's 200, 800. There's a math section. There's 200, 800. You put those together, you get a score between 400 and 1600. 1600 is perfect. PSAT is about the same thing. Highest score is 1520. They just carve a little bit off the top end. The ACT, you get 4 scores: English, math, reading, and science. So as Phil pointed out, these things are pretty similar. We just got that science section. We'll talk about this in a moment. Scores 1 to 36, no idea where those came from. They add them up. You average them, and the composite score is, of course, between 1 and 36. Here for me are the big differences, the 20% that the person asked about between the SAT and the ACT. Big picture, the ACT compared to the SAT, I use the SAT as the benchmark. The ACT is a bit more straightforward, a tad less tricky than is the SAT, but it's more speeded. It gives you less time per question, so it can feel a little more intense because it's rushed. So a lot of students, Phil and I see, say, gosh, I really like the ACT because it felt more like school, it felt more straightforward, but I really didn't have a fun time with the time on that. And it's really trying to balance those two things. Can you figure, trying to balance those two things to figure out, is the ACT for you a better test than the SAT, or is the speediness of this just gonna get you stuck, in which case the SAT is the better test to take. And we can go into detail, but that's really what it comes down to, and why having kids, as Phil said, take a full SAT, take a full ACT, and let them have that experience so we can look just both objectively at the scores and subjectively at their experience. If I felt this, I like this better, or the timing was it was way too intense and I don't like being that pressured, and I'd much rather stick with the SAT, even though it's a little trickier, a little more clever, but I have enough time to think clearly on things.
Awesome. There are a lot of questions about the timeline, actually testing timeline. So first, do you recommend that sophomores take the mock tests to get a feeling about which tests might be better, or should they wait until junior fall for that? And if they do take it, should they prep for it?
So I would absolutely have the kid take it, a sophomore take the test. Unless they're like, Mom or Dad, you are out of your cotton pink mind. I'm not taking this stupid. No. Are you kidding me? I want to sleep late. Don't pitch a battle about this. If you have a kid who's interested, who's already thinking about college, who wants to check it out, it's a great opportunity because, as Phil said, it mimics the real experience. It gives you feedback. It's a way for you as a family to have a conversation. So I think it's a wonderful idea. Unless your kid looks at you like you've grown a third head or you've dropped down from Mars. I will say Phil and I both have sons who are just starting their freshman years at college. And my son is a lovely, lovely kid, as is Phil's, but my kid did everything in the world at the last possible moment. For reasons bad and not my fault, he decided that I should do test prep with him, and everything, literally, we were starting this conversation like halfway through junior year, and he finally really ended up taking this thing seriously at the start of senior year, which is not where most of you on the call want to be. You want to have this over and done with, but I know my kid, and that's who he was, and there was no way that I was going to push him or drag him or cajole him because his head wouldn't be in it. So if your son or daughter says, yeah, this would be interesting, I think it'd be fun, then, but if they're fighting you, don't push it during sophomore year, because it's nice, but it sure as heck is not necessary.
I'm going to jump in and just hit in broad strokes what the testing timeline looks like. And then Neha, please share some more related questions with us about timeline. If you look on screen, you'll notice that I included dates in the past, which I normally wouldn't, but I just wanted to give you all a look at what testing has actually taken place over the last several months. There was supposed to have been an SAT in June that earned the red color, indicating that that test simply did not happen, period. Over the summer, ACTs and SATs were administered at specific schools in areas that deemed it safe enough to do so. And really, we're still in a yellow period here, moving into late September and early October, to the point where some of our seniors are actually making short or longer trips to find schools that are open to administer the tests. The dates that are listed here are meant to be national test dates, and there are many more second semester, just to show you, okay? Here are a couple of big points. In addition to national test dates, there's been a little more talk and a little more action about in-school exams. Some of you may know this if your kids are a little bit older, but in late March, many schools in Montgomery County were planning to administer a full SAT as part of the school day, and it didn't happen because of the arrival of COVID. More and more institutions, in our area, the private schools, but we're hoping it'll be publics pretty soon, are opting to add in-school dates beyond the ones that are listed here. In a normal year, we would recommend that juniors generally sit for their first official exams in here. There are always going to be some who test earlier for a variety of reasons, but by and large, it tends to be from February until May, second semester, that most students test for the first time. Our hope is that all of these national dates combined with in-school dates will run, and you'll have plenty of opportunities. But here's the point. College Board and ACT want nothing more than to give their tests. Like, the way they grade themselves in life is purely based on how many kids sit for these things, and ideally how many more students take their test than take the other one. So you can bet that if some of these dates are inaccessible, more dates will be available. I don't think it's wise or accurate as a junior or a sophomore to say, oh, the tests won't be around. I think with a little bit of motivation, you're going to find opportunities to sit for these exams.
And if I can add if I really quickly, I'll add two things to that. The SAT changed itself in 2016, kind of its latest iteration of the new SAT. Before that time, Phil and I would have a lot of juniors who would take the tests, SAT or ACT, kind of early in junior year. And the reason it's now become the case that more kids are going to take it December, January, December, February, March, April, rather than, the very start of junior year, is that both testing organizations have made the math a bit more sophisticated. It used to be the SAT was really kind of geometry and algebra. You didn't even really have to know much of algebra 2, and that's no longer the case. It remains the case that a lot of people feel like, it's start of a junior year, I got to jump in and take this test early. And we would say no. You really want to take the test once the work of school has helped you learn the math. And then you spend time with Phil or with me reviewing stuff and working on those tricks and getting the motivation stuff. But it's not such a swell idea to invest time, your time and your kids' money on having someone like Phil or me teach your kids math that they're going to learn in school anyway. And so the fact that, for juniors, COVID is kind of goofing up the opportunity to take the test in the fall of junior year, great, because that will just delay things and let them focus on school, which is where 90% of the energy should be anyway, and learn this stuff. And then, there'll be some value add where we take a class with Phil or to do some tutoring with me, and we'll add to that and allow the hard work of school, to float the boat both on grades and on the skills that they need on these standardized tests.
How far in advance should a student start prepping before their first official test?
Well, I'll tell you this. The courses that we run are specifically designed to start 8 to 10 weeks before an official exam date. That doesn't mean that 2 to 2.5 months is the perfect amount of time for everyone, but it's a pretty good benchmark for many. Everyone's prep is different, and depending on how you structure it, it can go much longer and more gradually. But I'd say by and large, the students I interact with probably put 2 to 4 dozen total hours into their preparation between the work they do with us and some of the work they do on their own. I use the word dozen there because I thought it might sound a little less scary than saying 25 to 50 hours total. And so the idea is to space out that time in a way that it's part of the student's life, but it isn't the dominant part of their lives, because as Ned mentioned, we really want them focused on schooling for school's sake. And parenthetically, good work at school is going to pay off on the tests as well. So it's an individual thing, but I do think that 2 to 3 months is often a good amount of time.
And the only things I would add to that are, generally, if the score that a kid, the score increase that a kid is trying to make is greater than less, then you probably need a little bit more time to do that on average. And depending on your kid's temperament, some kids, the excitement or the butterflies of tests actually help them do better, much like you get butterflies before public speaking or a soccer game or something. And for other kids, that extra pressure kind of craters them. And so if you have a kid who's just wired a little bit hotter, has got a more nervous temperament, the closer you get to the test, the kind of more their brain starts to seize up a little bit. And so giving them a little bit of a longer runway for that is going to be useful. Because of the work that I do, I get people who are sometimes way too forward thinking. I just had a conversation with a family the other week who was saying, is test prep in ninth grade, can we be doing this? And from my perspective, it is a terrible idea. I've been doing this since 1993, and I've had 4 or 5 people who've talked me into it, and I've regretted it every single time. If you think that you really need to start your kid on test prep in ninth grade, I suggest sitting them down and trying to walk them through the intricacies of a 401k plan and see how much their eyes glaze over. And that's about where you'll be with test prep. In part because, as I mentioned before, so much of the math that's on this is stuff that they're going to learn in sophomore year and in junior year. And so to begin doing test prep before and tackling math content before they've learned it in school has the very high likelihood of making kids feel that they're cooked, they're toast, they're terrible at this math, and they're never going to do well. And it's simply because it's all new to them. And it's so much easier for me as an instructor to add to what kids already know rather than having to teach them really sophisticated stuff from the ground up. That's just not a good use, again, of your money or of their time. So for me, junior year, if you have a kid who's really gangbusters and is ahead in math, maybe at the end of sophomore year, but earlier than that, I think it's really misplaced time and energy.
Completely agree. Let's do a couple more questions. I don't want to keep people too long. And one thing I think I'll make sure to do is I will make sure to chat out my email address so that if you all have questions for me, you can reach me directly. And then if you want to share.
Yeah, yep, I'll do the same thing.
We can do that in the next few minutes, but go ahead, Neha.
How do you actually sign up for the official tests?
It's just something you do online. Keep in mind that the SAT and ACT are run by 2 competing agencies, which means you have to enroll
Coke and Pepsi
separately for them. Okay. The first time through, it can take up to 25 to 30 minutes to complete a registration. So depending on how healthy your family life is, this is something you can either do as a family or put on your child. But you do want to make sure that you register carefully, that you hold on to your passwords, and that you roll from there.
Can I offer 2 quick pieces of advice on that? The reason that it can take so long the first time through is both College Board, who makes the SAT, and ACT, who makes the ACT, have scores. I've never gone through and counted how many questions there are. They're probably north of 200 questions of kind of biographical information. Have you done these math classes? What are your extracurricular activities? Do you like working with numbers versus people? It goes on and on and on and on. And what they're really making is for each kid kind of an educational and really psychographic profile of kids. Now, for any of you who have kids who have already gone through this process, you know that after sophomore year, and then heaven forbid after the junior year PSAT, you get completely inundated with emails and brochures. And that's because when your kid signs up for the PSAT or SAT or ACT and fills out those questions, she's made a profile of herself, and then the testing organizations sell your kid's name along with hundreds of thousands of other people's in bulk to colleges, who then spam you and slam you with brochures. If I may, I would suggest having your son or daughter make a separate email, Ned Johnson's college stuff at gmail.com, probably not taken, right? Make a separate email for signing up for the SAT or ACT. Now, remember to go back and check that, because that's where your registration will be. But that allows you to silo all of those communications from colleges, and then you go and look at it once a week, once a month, whatever, as opposed to getting constantly pinged and pinged and pinged and pinged and pinged by every college, when we're really trying to help kids kind of stay focused on this work of school and of life. Also, all those questions of what do you want to do when you grow up, those are optional. You don't have to fill those out. They definitely need Phil's name, his address, his date of birth, where he's going to take the test, and most importantly, of course, his credit card information. But all that other stuff is optional. So you don't have to do that. You don't have to become a commodity that the testing organizations are selling.
This is one of the many ways in which Ned and I never practiced what we preached, because I know in my house, at least, my son did not take this advice and had his emails commingled for, from sophomore year on. Let's do one or two more questions, Neha, then we can liberate this.
Yeah, there are just a handful more. You would not suggest that students prep for any the mock tests, correct?
Oh, no.
The whole purpose of the mock tests is for us to get a starting point. And the best way to do that is to do it unprepared. And if you're going to take 2 mock tests, great. You should be equally unprepared for both. I will make one comment. If the PSAT is administered in October, if your child is able to take that exam, then if it's a choice between taking a mock ACT or a mock SAT, you should know where I'm going. You probably want to prioritize the ACT. So if you're going to have a minor battle in your home, a mock ACT in conjunction with the PSAT accomplishes the same goal. But ideally, they sit for one exam of each type sometime this year.
And I'll say for us, when we administer the ACT, because it's a little different from the SAT, like we've talked about, it's a little bit more speeded. We tend to give people about 30 seconds of overview and tips, and because here's what you want to do on the English, and then we do the English. Here's what you want to do math, and so we're not getting into any content. We're not getting deep. We're just giving them, if a kid had never played baseball before, you kind of show them how to hold the bat and say, get your feet a little bit wider, and you'll swing, and then we'll go from there. But to Phil's point, yeah, because there's probably only so much time and energy and enthusiasm that anyone would have preparing for these tests, I certainly would not do preparation before taking these mock tests. I suppose if you had a kid who is just incredibly anxious about these things generally, and you're trying to kind of coax him or her to take this, because novelty is kind of stressful, you could, if you wanted to, pull down a test from the internet and have them do a passage, like 10 questions of English and 5 questions of math and 3 questions of science, not the whole darn test, but just poke and say, so that's not too scary. So they don't go in there, feeling really jittery, if that's the kid that you got.
Are the College Board emails about scholarships legit?
Well, go ahead, Ned. You can start.
No, you go ahead.
I mean, look, some of them are. The reality, though, is the emails you're getting are far more about marketing and increasing application numbers than anything else. There are going to be many opportunities along the way to collect scholarship information. As we discussed earlier, many of your kids will receive discounts at school based on their scores right away. Many more of you will research specific scholarships at specific institutions, and There are some that are renowned for offering more scholarship money. So I wouldn't dismiss all of this correspondence as being a joke, but I would not take an email from Harvard to be tantamount to a letter of admission, because that's certainly not what it is.
Right, and I would say that the for folks who are interested, this book called "Who Gets In and Why You're Inside College Admissions" by Jeff Soling was really good, and he talks about a guy there who was in the early days of basically creating brochures for colleges. He'd actually been in political role of driving engagement that way, and he moved over to college admissions, and it very much is. All of these things are really designed towards influencing as many kids as possible to apply to my college. That's their goal. That's their goal. One, because they want to make sure they sell enough seats. And two, if they can turn away more people, it makes them look like a hotter college. So if you have a kid who's, again, keep in mind that those scholarship, the merit money is really a discount. And it's the idea, if Emory had the idea that this kid is Stanford bound, but golly, if we can cut the price by half, they might come to Emory with all of the tremendous academic ability and maybe test scores and athletic, whatever that she has. We can maybe entice her to come to Emory with merit scholarship. And that sounds a whole lot sexier than coupon.
Are the subject tests also optional as well now?
Yeah,
yes.
so
no college in the country at this point requires subject tests. Georgetown still recommends 3 of them, but yeah, those used to be really important. There used to be a lot of the work that Phil and I did, 7 or 10 years or more ago. But no, and so again, these, a little bit like APs at this point, are a really nice feather in your cap. If you have a kid who's really great at chemistry, that is her thing, then to take a subject test and an AP in chemistry and get north of 700 and get a 4 or 5, it's a wonderful thing. Because if we go back to where we started with so many things test score optional, if, I read something like 40% of kids at MCPS have a GPA of 4.0 or higher. It's a really academic place. It's a bunch of really good learners. And if there's a way for that kid to take a subject test in chemistry and really rock it, it's useful, but it's never required.
All right, last question. Would you recommend a sophomore shoot for one of the October PSATs or the January one?
They probably won't have a choice.
Yeah, you're not going to have a choice there. That one is out of your hands. You can bet that MCPS is going to do everything it can to provide one good day on which to sit for these PSATs, but you're going to have to follow their lead. And frankly, from your perspective, it shouldn't matter in the slightest whether that test is taken early in October, late in October, or even later than that. Again, please keep the PSAT in its proper perspective for preliminary purposes. It's really much more about planning for when you might sit for the official tests that matter, that should be on your radar. And again, for most students, that's going to mean second semester of junior year, which means for our sophomores out there, you are 18 plus months early on this. So this should represent the very, very beginning of the beginning of your consideration of testing. I feel bad. I feel like we shouldn't hold people any longer. If you do have more individual questions, though, feel free to email Ned or me. You can obviously get more information about exactly how we run our different programs. But I know I had a good time. It's hard to tell whether you all did because all we got were the questions from you. But I want to thank you so much for joining us. And our hope is that this took the anxiety level down and not up, that you feel better informed now for having been here.
Yeah, and again, to echo that, I mean, nobody needs to take these tests, but a lot of kids, because MCPS and BCC especially is filled with kids who are really good learners. It's an opportunity, and it has only upside and almost no downside for kids. And so we look forward to seeing a bunch of your kids online November 7th or December 12th to give them some experience taking these practice tests to help them make decisions, whether it's SAT or ACT or none of the above. And that's okay too.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great night.